Thank you. Yeah, thank you everybody who joined the event. So this is the event that we co-hosting with plenary. So I have some introduction about the OneBeam. Yeah, I will have some information so about the company profile, some company overview and organize check, and also some topical project and customer that we have done. Yeah. Our vision and our mission is want to apply the new technology to the practical problem in the construction, and we have the core value of team want to dedicate to the customer. Yeah. OneBeam had established in 2017, and we have the focus on the project management and BIM implementation, and we have the very good connection with the BIM consultant in Vietnam and also other developer, architecture, engineering team, and also the contractor. Yeah, and continue please. Yeah, and at the moment we have around 15 people, and we have the sales team, technical team, commercial director, and also BIM manager. Yeah, please. Yeah, next. Yeah. And here is some kind of project that we have done so far. Yeah. Here is some project in the masterboard, in the laser scan, the laser survey, and also the BIM project. And we also do the 3D, 5D, 4D, and 6D. Yeah. So here we also the primary partner at Vietnam. Yeah. Very important. It is a platform to perform to deploy the BIM project. Yeah. And here we apply plenary in the Cần Thơ hospital project. This project we do the 3D modeling, do the class detection, and also the HPU model. And now the project is in the HPU model stage. Yeah, and we apply plenary at the beginning. From the time we receive the contract, and we divide the contract into the scope, and we assign the job to the team member. So in this platform, they allow us to share on the commitment of the customer to the team member. So it's very transparent, and the BIM manager will follow up, and also they will check the quality directly on the system, also at the timeline for delivery to the customer. So I think that it's a very good platform. So all the team member can join and know what to do, what is the timeline, what is the quality they need to deliver to the customer. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so for the next step, this is some other client that we have done so far. You can see there's some owner, contractor, and also the consultancy. Very big client here is the Raffle, and like Architect and Ateria. Yeah, some other BIM consultant, A2P. Yeah, some other contractor like LP Construction and Havacom. Yeah. So today I have some introduction about the OneBeam, and I would like to introduce Mr. David. David is my commercial director.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Huang, for that. I just want to put a bit of context about myself. I've been in Vietnam for over 20 international students. I'm basically cost management, commercial management. So I've worked on, in those 20 years, probably over 200 projects in Vietnam and maybe 50 major projects. In my experience, BIM has been slow to catch. See it mentioned in requirement for contractors to prepare a BIM model, and sometimes that's the last thing I see. We're long Hong Kong, UK, Australia on application, and I think that's down to one main reason, and that's down to the fact that people know all about it, but they don't really know how to implement and use it to obtain maximum value. That said, this software system, a management platform that derives maximum value from the BIM model, from planning, design, tendering and procurement, construction, and operation. OneBIM is able to support the process from A to Z. We can act as the BIM manager so that the maximum value is derived. So I don't really want to go into too much detail at the moment on individual projects, but just the message for Vietnam, derive the maximum form to achieve that. So if I may hand over to Clive, and we can take questions at the end.
Thank you, David. It's a breadth of experience that you have, and fantastic to be invited to share more about these new standards that are making life easier to get what the requirements are so everyone can get value from BIM. That's the goal. We're excited to share this because it is quite new as a set of standards, but what we're going to take you through is why it's important and what they are and how Plannerly can help you plan early, as the subtle play on the name, planning early, saves a lot of time and money, and how you can use the templates and the resources that we'll share with you at the end to accelerate your adoption of BIM and to implement it in the absolute optimum way. Just as we get started, I'm going to end the poll and share the results so that we can see what we are able to, here we go, share the results. Hopefully you can see that on your screens. We see 43% of teams that are just starting to use BIM, but we've also got 21% that use it on every project. So that's a big spread, big mix. And then 50-50, exactly. Wow, 50-50 on the yes, we're using, and no, we're not starting to use BIM standards. So there's some advanced teams that are using BIM. And then we also see that there is a set of people starting to look at the ISO standards. And again, we're looking at 50% of teams either looking into, and we've actually got 7% of teams that have started using ISO 19650. Akos, you've been around BIM for a long, long time. If we look at BIM as a process, as a set of tools and people and a whole lot of magic, what does it look like? What does BIM actually look like? It's an interesting question. Well, is it this? Is that BIM?
Absolutely. It looks like BIM. Perfect BIM.
Yeah. We can see some pieces of a building in 3D, and maybe there's some information behind that. But if we ask the same question, what about this? Is this BIM?
Yeah, it looks like a little bit more BIM. I mean, I see the same items pretty much, but then a little bit more detailed maybe. But yeah, it is BIM. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then we ask questions, even more detail, even more geometry and information, accuracy, reliability, data, all of those really interesting parts that make up BIM. And which one is the one that we need? It's a challenge because they're all different and they could all be reasonably useful at certain stages throughout a project. But this is what causes a lot of disagreement. So we see this challenge between the owners, the architects, engineers, contractors, subcontractors, everyone, even in the mix of the manufacturers, trying to understand what they need to create, when they need to create it. And if there's a difference in opinion, it can cause a lot of problems. So in our industry, over the years, we've collected many standards, many guidelines and templates, best practices, ways of doing business, ways of doing BIM. And they range from the LOD spec to the level of accuracy spec to the Penn State BIM execution planning guidelines, and a whole raft of others that have been in the mix all the way along this beautiful journey that we've been on. However, even with all of those great standards and guidelines, we still have found ourselves recently having some problems. And this is a pretty radical challenge when teams have got, as David said, we're using BIM on projects or we ask for BIM, but probably the reason why it hasn't resulted in the optimum value for everyone is that there's usually no discussion further. There's a lot of people that just say, yes, I'd like some BIM. And it ends up with only 1.8%. This is collected through about 1,000 respondents to a survey that were all related to BIM projects about how clear the requirements were. And there's not a really good success rate when you only have 1.8% of projects defining clear requirements. And the result has been the teams still miss information. They can't start their tasks until they have the information they need. They end up with so many problems and clashes. They are either creating too much detail, maybe too soon, or too little, too late. And then everyone's talking about the communication challenges in the AEC industry. It's challenging, it's difficult. And that's not the only set of challenges, from missing information to not integrating the tools, working out of sequence, clashes, poor communication, conflicts, scattered information. All of these are really big challenges. So why does ISO 19650 come into this? Well, We've tackled all of these standards and had all of these great guidelines before, but they've been very different and they've been specific for a certain country. Well, ISO 19650 comes in to outline the concepts and principles for information management. It's a lot more than just BIM. It's a lot more than just 3D. It's really managing the information and the critical workflow requirements, exchanges, and understanding and management right the way through to handover. And it's applied to not just one project type, it's applied to all project types. It's a unified approach, and we are seeing it, this is the key, we are now seeing this being applied globally. And it's being adopted not just by teams or companies or projects, but it's actually governments and many, many big governments around the world that are starting to say, this is for us, and this is going to make it easier, much more streamlined, and we can all talk the same language to save a lot of money. Okay, so we've talked about how BIM can be a challenge and how standards come in to help us, but what is ISO 19650? What is it? It's important, we understand that, but what actually is it? Well, I have this on my desk, and it's the set of standards plus a whole bunch of other really, really useful guidelines, some created by the UK BIM framework, the BSI, a whole bunch of really valuable commentary for this guideline as well. And if we dig into the heart of the workflow, you'll see 8 steps that are unpacked in part 2 of the ISO 19650 series. Not getting into too much detail, but there are a set of documents that encompasses this ISO 19650 series. Part 2 explains the workflow, and inside of part 2, we have these 8 steps. And the 8 steps range from assessment and need, so finding out what the owner, or as we'll start to refer to them, the appointing party. So who is appointing, who is making that contract appointment? That is the owner, the client, the person paying the bills. They start off here. And then they tender, get responses, get appointments, get mobilization, get right the way through that workflow so that we can, at the end of the project, close it out. We're able to follow the same workflow with all of these people around the world so that everyone understands where they are in the workflow, how to describe the requirements. If we're talking about an OIR, an EIR, a BEP, any type of document or resource, as the ISO process refers to them, we know exactly that we're talking the same language. And that's really important. And this heartbeat, this beating heart of the ISO 19650 process, if we unpack it even further, looking at the first 3 steps in a little bit more detail, and then unpacking even just one of the steps inside of this first part of the workflow, we start to see that there are different requirements. And those requirements are lists of things that we might need to consider, and also resources like, for example, the plan of work or a scope or how you procure, detailing out exactly what should be completed and conveyed and communicated at certain stages in this project. This could be seen as quite challenging because it then unpacks further and further and further. You talk about the OIR, which are organizational requirements, talk about project requirements, asset requirements, exchange requirements, BIM execution planning, mobilization. All of these terms are potentially new and foreign and not implemented in current workflows. So there is something to be said that it can be a challenge to start to think about these, but don't fear, because we have a really, really useful way to unpack this. But as I said, it can be this confusion, this visible confusion, this challenge to understand. It's a new workflow potentially, but we have an opportunity today to go step by step so that you can understand it in a bit more detail and everyone can be really, really keyed in on the parts that are important. This is an overall diagram that you guys can actually get as a download. We see the 8 steps along the top from assessment and need all the way to closing a project out. And on the left-hand side, we see the roles. And this is the owner or the appointing party, the person that's paying the bills, the lead appointed party, that could be one or more than that, but usually one main lead that is appointed by the appointing party. And then a set of appointed parties that roll up through a lead appointed party, this becoming a task team that accomplishes everything on the project. This hierarchy is very familiar to you as an owner, as potentially a contractor, and then subcontractors potentially. And if we look at those swim lanes and we look at this workflow, what we'll see is today broken into 3 very simple steps. And we'll start to talk about the first part as being assessing what's required and asking for it in a tender. The second part is responding to that tender and appointing somebody, as actually contracting somebody. And then the third step that we'll look at is how do you use all of that rich information in your downstream workflows to make it more automated and make it easier. So let's take a look. The first part is the tender process. And the tender process is essentially kicked off by the owner, the appointing party, saying, I need somebody to manage the information. And that function is a specific appointment. It could be somebody inside of their organization, or it could be a consultant. Maybe it's even one of you on the call as a BIM consultant working for that owner to be the orchestrator. You will be understanding how to put together these documents and how to ask the right questions in order to define the exchange information requirements for the tender. The organizational, the project, and the asset information requirements are all packaged together to become exchange information requirements. The EIR is a way of saying, this is my set of requirements as a tender document that everyone can understand, and it's built in the same way, in a structured way. To speed up this whole process, inside of Plannerly, we have templates for this. So you can simply create a new project, click on the right tiles that you would like to use. So here an EIR, a BEP, appointment documents, and also the RACI content. So understanding responsibility, accountability, who needs to be consulted and who's informed. And it's as quick as that, picking those documents. They become tabs inside of a project. You can permission them, so you can have certain people accessing certain parts and not other parts. And really understanding everything from the BIM execution planning workflow to the meeting minutes to the legal language, all in that same place with permissions. Really, really powerful. But the really important part of the ISO process is the ISO 19650 workflow, is that you can be more prescriptive about what you are asking for. And here we're able to define the asset information requirements at an element level with an information requirement associated. So quickly and simply tied to a purpose. Here we're picking the asset registration, planned maintenance, and preventative maintenance. And we are associating all of the geometry requirements, the information, documentation, notes, attachments, links, checklists, and responsibilities, all in this same package of requirements. It makes it super simple and really visual for the owner as well. And not only the geometry and the documentation, but also that really rich information. So when is the warranty required, or what specifically for storage tanks at this stage within the asset information requirements? Much more targeted than just asking for an LOD number that is very abstract and difficult to represent. And then as we build this tender set of documentation, which is the OIR, through to create this package of EIR, which includes the AIR, forgive me for using these terminologies, but it's essentially what needs to be done by whom. That tender process needs to be thought out, needs to be secure, and we need to make sure that only certain prospective teams are seeing the things that they need to see without flooding them with too much information. So we have a really, really nice way of doing that, making it simple to invite teams to the tender. And that's it. That's the first step. The first step is defining all of your requirements and inviting teams to tender. But once we've defined those requirements and we put them out to a tender, we're going to want to have people to respond to them. So in the next step, we start to get tender responses with mobilization plans and what is called a pre-contract or pre-appointment BIM execution plan, and understanding then somebody getting selected and locking in much more details before we get to appointment documents, which are the legal framework that is actually the contract that teams are contracted to. So if we look at that appointment process, the first part is responding, and the second part is defining in more detail after you select who should be appointed and define the responsibility of, is it this element in this system required by this team, and being able to appoint that, a very targeted appointment set of documentation that is a summary of even the task team's responsibilities as well. We have templates for all of this workflow, and it really is a built-in workflow inside of Plannerly as well. So the first part that you see is responding with things like your BIM execution plan or resource availability and understanding how you're going to onboard people, what the gaps in the skills are. Maybe there's some training required. You need to test the systems, understand how you would test the hardware and the software. How do you make sure that the CDE, the environment in which you're sharing and managing information, is going to be ready for you when you start your project? And then also defining not just the assets that we did in the first step, but here we're dragging and dropping much more detailed requirements for responsibility matrix, where you can see a lot more requirements, and also the master information delivery plan, which is a summary of all of the tasks that the team members will have. So there you saw the architect's tasks and the mechanical team's tasks. They're all formulated, all summarized into one simple responsibility matrix, and that's all drag and drop as well, all very, very simple with drag and drop. And then defining these information containers is really, really important. We talked about level of information need just a second ago. This is where you would be able to define down to maybe the specs and the links out to other systems that you might be using for exactly that requirement, whether it's an IFC wall that you're needing to use, whether you're needing to attach a specification or follow a certain workflow. That is really well defined in these containers. And then the important part is that you don't flood in that appointment process unnecessary requirements to every team. So we have a filtering workflow to cut and slice the database into really simple, very visual PDFs that teams can then sign. We also integrate an e-signature workflow, which is the click of a button to say, I would like this team with this person to sign it. And you'll see their signatures coming in and attaching to that document. Much more secure than a lot of the other systems on the market, because it's actually a signature based on a login and a project-based signature as well. And then when you've gathered all of this data, all of these requirements, we can then start to use them for other parts of the workflow. And the really interesting part now is, as we've built all these requirements, how do we use them in the downstream workflow? Let's take a look at step 3, which is using the structured data. The first part can be just simply automating all of the task management. Instead of having to start a new Gantt chart from scratch, we actually provide all of the tasks that have been contracted to, and simply, again, drag and drop for collaborative planning, and also drag and drop to simplify the progress updates. So you don't have to worry about calling somebody or emailing them, asking them for an update. It's always live. It's always available for the project manager to see. And then we also use that data in downstream workflows, like using Dynamo and Revit with that data that's exported to automatically create our shared parameters and also automatically assign those parameters to the elements in that workflow. So once you've created structured data, you can do a lot with it, automating that process. Also inside of ArchiCAD, so it doesn't matter what tool you would use, that data is structured, always going to be created in the same way so that you can automate a lot of these downstream workflows, checking the model, also aggregating data. In this example, we have a few different pieces of technology coming together, but combining them into Power BI to be able to filter and see whether you are meeting the requirements and validating whether the information has been added to the right objects, for example. It's a really, really powerful connection once you've defined the requirements in a structured form so that you can use them downstream as well. So those 3 pieces of the workflow that the ISO 19650 steps help us to achieve, and much more in a uniform fashion, are the assessment of what needs to happen and definition of the exchange information requirements for a tender, being able to respond to that tender and knowing exactly how to do that so that you can be chosen and contract for the exact set of requirements and tasks that you know what you're doing, being able to then use that data as structured data downstream as well. We promised that we would share a few resources, so this may be a time where, Akash, you would like to copy and paste some more links into the chat. We have lots of resources to share. There are standards that you can buy. We obviously recommend that you buy these standards so that you can have them and read them and understand them as a company. We also have links out to those standards on this website, which is what is ISO 19650 as the hyphenated link. That will walk you through each of the parts, also to all of the great guidance that is available from the UK BIM framework. We have YouTube channels, everything from BSI, so the British Standards Institute, which named as just BSI now because they are prevalent around the world. And you'll see a lot of partnering webinars with Planoly partners and BSI around the world. Some great content on there. We also have a lot on our YouTube channel. And I mentioned the UK BIM Alliance as well. They've got some fantastic videos there. And I mentioned the UK BIM framework a number of times. This is a fantastic resource. It's talking and guiding people through the standards. So it really helps you to understand and unpack and provides examples. So that's another one. And then you'll obviously need some form of support and training. We provide some at Planoly. You'll obviously be able to get OneBIM support. And there are a number of others ranging from Operam to BIM Design Hub to BRE to BSI, and a bunch more coming online as we are talking as well. You'll see some more from us as well. We looked at that simplified workflow, and I mentioned you could grab the PDF for it. So that's also a download, ISO-19650-PDF. And if you want to grab that in either one big piece or in the parts, you can use it in slides and share that and explain the workflow to your colleagues. We have a great webinar series. It's 6 webinars that unpack each part of this workflow. So that's something to check out. And that's ISO 19650 webinar, hyphenated. And also importantly, inside of the Planoly application, you can grab all of the templates. Not only can you grab the templates, but you can also get involved because the templates are a huge, huge operation where over 200 teams from over 40, so nearly 50 countries, 100% volunteers, they are curating and managing and creating these templates around the world. It is amazing, absolutely amazing. And we're releasing more and more languages through that team. It's 100% free to join. And yeah, your comments are incredibly welcome to advance the standards and the templates for you and your company and your industry. So we've talked about a lot, but let me summarize in just one short moment. These are new standards to a lot of teams, but do not get despondent with new 3-letter acronyms, TLAs, 3-letter acronyms and terminology. You will get used to it. The ISO 19650 is a framework that is global. You are going to be really far behind if you're not following this. It's the first time that we've truly had a standard that has been adopted and started to become global. So that's exciting from a BIM perspective. And it's right now that you're able to learn from all of the great resources, build more efficiencies into your workflows. And as a result, you can win more work because your services are transferable and are magnifiable on a global scale.